The call came just after midnight, tearing through the suffocating quiet of the Hofburg antechamber. Kale, who had been a vampire for 217 years and had not flinched at cannon fire, flinched. He snatched the phone from the polished surface of a table that had once belonged to an empress. Yes? His voice was a raw nerve. Across the room, Nikolai did not move. He was seated in a high-backed chair, a figure carved from stillness and shadow, watching the Vienna skyline glitter beyond the tall windows. He looked more like a monument to a king than a king himself, especially now. The fading had leached the last of the living warmth from his posture, leaving a brittle, dangerous grace. He could hear Kale's heartbeat, a frantic drum against the vast, slow silence of his own failing system. He could hear the tremor in his second-in-command's hand. Nikolai had been sitting in this chair for 9 hours. He had not intended to sit in it for 9 hours. He had sat down to read a report on Eastern Court mineral rights, a gripping document, truly, the vampiric equivalent of watching paint dry. And then the fading had done what it did, and 9 hours had dissolved into a single, gray, featureless moment. He had lost an entire Tuesday. Again. "Say it again," Kale whispered into the phone. "Slowly." A pause stretched, thin and humming with tension. Nikolai tracked a single bead of condensation as it slid down the outside of his untouched glass of water. He kept the glass there as a diagnostic tool. When the bead appeared to move at normal speed, he was having a good night. When it seemed to take a geological age to travel 2 inches, he was not. Tonight, it was glacial. Kale's head snapped up, his eyes, wide with a disbelief that bordered on terror, found Nikolai's. "They have it." Nikolai did not react. He had received false reports for 97 years. Hope was a poison he had long ago purged from his system. "It's not a rumor," Kale insisted, his voice cracking, sensing his king's profound stillness. "Vienna, the St. Anna blood bank, a standard donation. The tech ran it through the new spectral analyzer twice. He said it shimmered." Shimmered. The word hung in the air, an old piece of lore, a fairy tale told to fledgling vampires about a time before the world went gray. Harmonic resonance. The perfect blood. A specific, impossibly rare configuration of proteins and energy that didn't just sustain, but healed. It was said to sing to a vampire's senses, to feel like sunlight on the soul. It hadn't been seen since the Black Death swept through Europe, taking with it the handful of human bloodlines that carried the gift. Nikolai had been alive when those bloodlines still existed. He remembered the taste. It was, he reflected, extremely inconvenient to remember the taste. "The bag is designated AB negative," Kale continued, reading from whatever was on his screen. "The resonance signature is off the charts. They've never seen anything like it. They have it quarantined." For the first time in what felt like a century, Nikolai felt something other than the dull entropic weight of the fading. It was a low, dangerous hum deep in his chest, the ghost of a predator waking from a long starvation. The disease sat in him like a fog. It dampened his senses and slowed his thoughts, a fraying of the immortal cord. For decades, it had been a quiet dread. In the last year, it had become a certainty. He was dying the way stars die, a long, cold collapse. The donor? His voice was rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken since last Thursday. "That's the problem," Kale said, his brief flare of elation already souring into anxiety. "It was an anonymous mobile drive. They don't have a name, just a signature on a consent form, illegible, and a postcode." Of course, the universe did not give gifts. It set traps. "Get the bag," Nikolai commanded. His body felt heavy, each movement an act of will against a tide of leaden fatigue. "And get the form. I want to see the signature." "They won't release it. It's a medical anomaly. The National Health Service has already been alerted." Nikolai rose. The movement was fluid, but it cost him. It cost him a portion of the carefully husbanded energy He needed simply to exist through the night. He had been rationing himself for months now, each deliberate motion weighed against the question of whether he would need that energy later for something more critical. Standing up to answer the phone, for instance, walking to the window. The calculus of dying was remarkably tedious. He crossed the room and took the phone from Cale's hand. The man on the other end, a vampire named Lucian who managed their network of contacts within the city's medical system, was babbling with the particular enthusiasm of someone who had found something important and desperately wanted credit for it. "Lucian," Nikolai said. The word came out scraped and hollow, barely a voice at all. But it was enough. The babbling stopped, not because of volume or command, but because Lucian had served this king for 2 centuries and had never heard him sound like a man with nothing left to lose. "You have 1 hour to have that bag and all associated paperwork delivered to the side entrance of the Naturhistorisches Museum. Do not fail." He ended the call and handed the phone back to Cale. The hum in his chest was stronger now, a resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in his bones. Even the knowledge of the blood, the proximity of it, was calling to something deep within him. "And the postcode?" he asked. Cale's fingers flew across the screen of his tablet. SE23, London. London, a sprawling, chaotic, anonymous wilderness of 9 million souls. Finding one person based on a scribble and a partial address was not just a needle in a haystack. It was a specific atom in a hurricane. "Wonderful," Nikolai said flatly. "My favorite city." He had been saying this about London since 1666, when it had burned down and he had considered the improvement minimal. An hour later, in the cold marble echo of the museum's mineralogy wing, Nikolai held the bag of blood. It was just a standard donation bag, plastic and clinical. But through the thin vinyl, he could feel it. A warmth that was not temperature, but resonance, vibrating against his skin like a tuning fork pressed to dead nerves. And the color. Held against the dim service light, it wasn't just red. It seemed to contain its own luminescence, a liquid gold suspended in the deep crimson. He could smell it, even through the plastic. It registered not in his nose, but in the oldest, most predatory architecture of his brain. It smelled of life, pure and unfiltered, of sun on clean skin, of fresh bread, of the specific iron tang of health and vitality, and something else, something indescribably, impossibly right. The hunger, a dull ache he had managed for centuries on flat, joyless blood bank donations that tasted of nothing and sustained less, sharpened into a pang so vicious it made his throat close. Cale held out the consent form. The signature was a looping, hasty scrawl. H. Miller, or maybe Heller, or Keller. It was useless. But below it, on the line for temporary address, was the postcode, SE23, and a street name, Honor Oak Park. "Book the flight," Nikolai said. He felt the fading inside him, the slow, cellular thief. But for the first time in a very long time, he also felt the hunt. And the hunt was a kind of life, too. The trail from Vienna to London was a descent from the sublime to the absurd. The mobile blood drive had been parked outside a university library for a student wellness week. The main draw, according to the drive's social media page, which Cale had pulled up with an expression of physical pain, had been free cookies. The signature, H. Miller, belonged to one of 700 students who had signed up. The address in Honor Oak Park was a student housing complex, a sprawling, anonymous brick building with 300 identical doors. "She donated the most extraordinary blood in 6 centuries, Cale said, staring at the building from across the rain-slicked street. "For a biscuit." "Cookie," Nikolai corrected. He had not survived 7 centuries without learning to be precise about language. The British say biscuit. The drive's marketing said cookie. This tells us the organizers were either American or aspirational. This is not helpful. Very little about this situation is helpful, Cale. For 3 nights, they sifted through university records, cross-referencing names against the partial signature. The CCTV footage from the blood drive was a grainy mess of students in hoodies, none of them identifiable. London was not kind to Nikolai. The fading was worse in the damp air, the constant drizzle a gray veil that matched the gray veil descending over his senses. He fed twice from the cold clinical bags Cale kept in a medical cooler, type O negative, the universal flavor of absolutely nothing. It was like drinking lukewarm water and calling it sustenance. It kept the body running. The soul, such as it was, remained unfed. He navigated the modern city with the particular weariness of someone who remembered it before electricity. Everything was louder than it needed to be. Everything moved faster than it needed to move. A teenager on the tube had stared at him for 3 stops, and he had spent those 3 stops wondering if his stillness was too still, if his breathing rhythm was wrong, if he had forgotten to blink again. The maintenance of appearing human was a full-time occupation when you were running on fumes. On the 4th night, Cale finally found a thread. A veterinary student named Haven Miller had used her university ID at a coffee shop half a mile from the Honor Oak Park address. Her student records listed her as AB negative. Haven, Nikolai repeated the name. It felt soft, unassuming. Not the name of a warrior or a witch. Her university profile picture showed a young woman with a serious expression, dark hair pulled back from a face that was more interesting than beautiful. She had intelligent, watchful eyes. She was holding a ginger cat with an expression of profound indignation. The cat looked equally unimpressed. "This is her?" Nikolai asked. "All data points converge," Cale confirmed. They stood across the street from her building, cloaked in the drizzle and the anonymity of the night. Nikolai focused his senses, pushing past the fog of his illness. He filtered out the cacophony, the 64 heartbeats, the overlapping conversations, the hum of refrigerators, and the low drone of a television playing a cooking competition. He searched for the scent. It was faint, almost lost beneath the smell of takeout curry and cheap laundry detergent. But it was there. He followed it up to the 3rd floor, to the 2nd window from the left. And he saw her. She was sitting on the floor of her living room, surrounded by a fortress of textbooks. She wore a faded gray sweatshirt and had a pencil tucked behind her ear. Her brow was furrowed in concentration as she stared at a diagram of what looked like the circulatory system of a horse. The room was chaos. Books were stacked on every surface. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the coffee table, and everywhere there were animals. A 3-legged dog snoozed on a battered armchair. An elderly cat was draped over the back of the sofa, and in a large playpen in the corner, a writhing mass of tiny kittens tumbled over one another. "Well," Cale said after a long silence, "the savior of the Eastern Court appears to be a 20-something who lives in a zoo." As Nikolai watched, she sighed, stretched, and got to her feet. She went to the playpen and knelt, her expression softening into something that had no guard at all. She scooped up the tiniest of the kittens, a little scrap of black fur, and held it in one palm. With the other hand, she picked up a small bottle. He watched her feed the kitten. The tenderness in the gesture was unmistakable, the careful angle of the bottle, the low murmur of her voice, the way she cradled the tiny body as if it were the most important thing in the world. He could hear her heartbeat from across the street. Thump, 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 thump. Steady, healthy, completely alive. The hunger hit him, and it was not the usual sharp pang. It was a profound, hollow ache, not just for the blood, but for the life force radiating from that small, brightly lit window. Warmth, care, the messy, vibrant, ridiculous business of being alive. Everything the fading was taking from him. "What's the plan?" Cale asked. "Do we take her now?" Nikolai watched her place the kitten back with its siblings. She stood up, rubbing the small of her back. She looked tired. She looked like a 26-year-old student who was overwhelmed and trying her best. "No," he said, "we don't take her." "My lord, you're not well. We don't have time for subtlety." "We will make time." As what? You'll approach her as Nikolai, king of the Eastern Court, who needs her blood to keep from turning to dust? I will approach her as a scientist, Nikolai said, turning away from the window. As someone who has discovered the anomaly in her blood and wants to study it. A scientist, Cale repeated, with the tone of a man watching his king walk toward a cliff. You, the man who once described a laboratory as a room where humans make a tremendous fuss about things they could simply observe. I have range, Nikolai said. He found her 3 days later, just as she was leaving the university's veterinary teaching hospital. The London sun was a weak watercolor wash in the sky, and he stood in the deep shadow of a stone archway, the light of physical discomfort against his skin. He had dressed the part, a dark, well-tailored suit that was understated, expensive, and academic. He carried a leather briefcase. He had even forced himself to breathe, the in and out, a conscious, mechanical process that made him feel like a tourist performing a local custom. She walked with purpose, a heavy backpack slung over one shoulder, her brow furrowed. She didn't notice him at first. Miss Miller? Her head snapped up. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of hazel, narrowed with immediate suspicion. She was not one of those people who offered a reflexive, polite smile to a stranger. She looked at him like he was a problem to be assessed. Do I know you? Flat, guarded. My name is Dr. Julian Albescu. I'm a hematological researcher with the Ziegler Institute in Switzerland. He had invented the Ziegler Institute that morning. Cale had built the details, a Nobel laureate on the board, a reclusive philanthropist benefactor, an impeccable website. Nikolai had rehearsed the role with the focus of an actor preparing for opening night, which was a generous comparison, given that his last theatrical performance had been in 1743, and the reviews had been mixed. Haven's expression did not change. Okay, and? I'm here because of a recent blood donation you made, in Vienna. Her eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composure. How do you know about that? The European Blood Alliance shares data on anomalous samples. Yours was highly anomalous. This, at least, was true. My institute specializes in exactly this kind of unique biological signature. She shifted the weight of her backpack. He could hear her heart rate quicken, 72 to 81. Alarm, not excitement. What kind of anomaly? She asked. The donation center just said my iron was good. It's far more complex than iron levels. It's about the bioresonant frequency of your erythrocytes. The protein structures on the cell membranes are configured in a way that, frankly, we've only ever seen in historical theoretical models. He was layering the jargon thick enough to plaster a wall. He watched her process it. She wasn't intimidated. She was parsing it, testing its weight, the way a vet student would examine a limping animal, looking for the thing that didn't track. Bioresonant frequency, she repeated. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his face. He knew what she saw. Pale skin, eyes that were too dark, too still. The particular quality of someone who was not quite occupying their body the way a living person did. He forced himself to blink. And the Ziegler Institute flew you all the way from Switzerland to talk to a vet student on a sidewalk because of it? When you find something that could rewrite entire chapters of medical science, Miss Miller, you don't send an email. You get on a plane. She was silent for a long moment. Then, what do you want? A conversation. And if you're willing, a blood sample. For our research. We would, of course, compensate you for your time. I don't want money, she said, quick and sharp. A line drawn. I want to see your data, the analysis from the Vienna sample. He gestured with his briefcase. I have it with me. Perhaps we could discuss it over a coffee? I have to get home. My fosters need to be fed. Of course. You can come there, she said, and it wasn't an invitation so much as a terms of engagement. You can tell me what's so special about my blood while I deal with 5 kittens who have no concept of personal space. She gave him a thin smile. Hope you're not allergic. Not at all, he said. He hadn't had an allergic reaction since 1328. He followed her. The walk was a quiet torment. The scent of her was a constant presence just ahead of him, and it was making the fog in his head worse. Not thicker, but sharper, the edges of his hunger honing themselves against the proximity. Every beat of her heart was a metronome counting out something he was losing. Her apartment was exactly as he had seen it from the street. The three-legged dog, a scruffy terrier mix, limped over and sniffed his trousers with intense interest before giving a low, uncertain grumble. "That's Diogenes," she said. "He's suspicious of everyone. Don't take it personally." The name suited the dog. There was something philosophically confrontational about his expression. Nikolai, who had once met the actual Diogenes' intellectual descendants in a tavern in Constantinople, appreciated the reference. The kittens are Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Zeno, and Epicurus. Epicurus is the one who screams the most. Naturally, Nikolai said. The real Epicurus was also quite vocal about his needs. She paused, half-turned toward the kitchen. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, that her joke had been received and returned. "You know your Greek philosophers." "I had a thorough education," he said, which was perhaps the most conservative description of 7 centuries of existence ever offered. She showed him the fabricated data. She read it with the focus of someone who was not just looking at the information, but looking for the information behind the information. "These resonance peaks," she said, tapping a chart. "What's the medium?" "It's a proprietary gel medium. It allows us to measure the quantum energy signature of the hemoglobin itself." Quantum energy signature, right. She tapped another graph. "This peak here corresponds to the resonant frequency of gold. Is that normal?" He felt a flicker of something that was not hunger. It was respect. She had found the real anomaly inside the fake data in under 4 minutes. "It's the primary reason I'm here. That harmonic resonance with noble metals is theorized to have incredible therapeutic applications. Cellular regeneration, anti-neoplastic properties." "You mean it could cure cancer," she said, cutting through his jargon with a machete. "Among other things." She closed the file and handed it back to him. "It's interesting, but I'm not giving you a blood sample." The carefully constructed world tilted. "Miss Miller, Haven, I understand your hesitation, but the importance of this research, I'm sure it can't be overstated," she said. "But I'm a vet student, Dr. Albescu. I spend my days learning about informed consent for animal subjects. The bar for human subjects is, I assume, a little higher." She gestured at the file. "You've shown me some flashy graphs and used a lot of $5 words, but you haven't told me anything real. What is the Ziegler Institute's funding source? Who sits on your ethics board? What are your publication protocols?" Each question was a scalpel, slicing through the layers of his deception. Cale had built a Hollywood set, impressive from the front, empty framework from behind. He recited the prepared lines about private endowments and benefactor privacy. She muttered, "Convenient," and turned her back to him, picking up a kitten to feed. Audience over. He left his card, more of Cale's meticulous work, on the table by the door. She nodded without turning around. He let himself out. The click of the closing door sounded unnaturally loud. He stood in the hallway, surrounded by the ordinary smells of the building, and felt the full weight of his failure. He had come for a resource. He had found a person. A stubborn, suspicious, fiercely compassionate person who was not impressed by his fictional institute. And the worst part was that he was beginning to respect her for it. This complicated everything. The next week was a slow descent. Nikolai forbade Cale from approaching Haven. He spent the nights in the London townhouse, sitting in the dark, conserving the flickering candle of his remaining energy. Feeding was a nightly exercise in futility. The cold bags of donor blood tasted like nothing, sustained less, and left him feeling like a phone plugged into a charger that no longer worked. The battery indicator flickered, but never climbed. Cale monitored Haven at a distance. She went to her classes. She walked the three-legged dog. She bought cat food in bulk. And, Cale reported, she spent hours in the university library, not in the veterinary section, but in the medical research archives. She was investigating him. On the 8th night, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Dr. Albescu? Her voice, clear, cautious, and edged. Miss Miller? I can't find any of your listed board members in the European Society of Hematology's registry. And your head of research, Dr. Anneliese Schmidt, apparently doesn't exist according to the University of Heidelberg, where your website claims she got her doctorate. He closed his eyes. Furthermore, she continued, her voice gaining a cold, surgical precision, the IP address for your institute's website is registered to a shell corporation in Gibraltar, which is owned by a holding company that specializes in antique furniture import-export. The house of cards was tumbling. Who are you? She asked. What do you really want? He could hang up, disappear, try another way, or he could do the one thing he had not done in centuries. Tell the truth. My name is not Albescu, he said. My name is Nikolai. And everything I told you was a lie. Sharp intake of breath. Why? Because the truth is difficult to believe. And because I need your help. Desperately. Help with what? I am not a medical researcher. I am something else. Something older. And I am dying. The anomaly in your blood is not a theoretical curiosity. It is the only thing in the world that can cure me. Silence. Then, what are you? I'm a vampire. The silence that followed was absolute. That's not funny, she said. I am not laughing, Haven. I have not laughed in a very long time. I am 742 years old. I am the leader of a group you might call a court, and I have a degenerative condition for which your blood is the only known cure, a condition we call the fading. He told her everything, the blood bank in Vienna, tracking her to London, the lie, his desperation. He left nothing out. When he finished, the line was quiet for so long he thought the connection had dropped. He could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. Her heart was at 130. Pure terror. Then her voice came, small but hard as diamond. Stay away from me. If I see you again, if you come anywhere near me or my animals, I will call the police. The line went dead. 9 days passed, the longest 9 days of Nikolai's 742-year existence. He did not return to Vienna. He remained in the London townhouse, a ghost in a borrowed home. The tremor in his hands was constant now. He had begun to have moments of disorientation, the scent of rain on cobblestones in 15th century Prague bleeding into the present, the flicker of gaslight on a Victorian street overlaying the modern lamps outside his window. His mind, his greatest remaining asset, was fraying at its edges. Cale was beside himself. We can just take her. A single feeding. She wouldn't even have to know. No. The command was a reflex, the last remnant of his authority. He was staring at the rain-slicked street on the 9th night, when the buzzer for the front door sounded. Not his phone. The door. Cale checked the security camera and went very still. It's her. Nikolai's body locked. Let her in. She stood in the doorway of his borrowed sitting room like someone who had walked into a building she wasn't sure would remain standing. She was wearing the same gray sweatshirt. She had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and a notebook clutched against her chest. Her knuckles were white around it. She looked terrible. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was unwashed. She had the specific, hollowed-out look of someone who had not slept properly in 9 days because the thing keeping them awake would not resolve into something they could dismiss. She looked at him, at the tremor in his hands, at the unnatural stillness of his body, at the way he occupied the chair like something that had been placed there rather than someone who had chosen to sit. And he watched the fear and the fury and the scientific curiosity war across her face in real time. You look like hell, she said. I am aware, he said. I came here because... She stopped, swallowed, started again. I spent 9 days trying to prove you were insane, or a con artist, or both. I couldn't. She crossed the room and set her notebook on the table between them. She opened it. He could see, even from his chair, pages and pages of dense, tight handwriting. Notes, citations, cross-references, diagrams. She had filled an entire notebook. There are patterns, she said, her voice shaking, but her words precise. Mentions of the wasting sickness in apocryphal texts from the 14th century. I found them through JSTOR, a digitized archive of Prague ecclesiastical records that mentions the wasting in 3 separate parish death registers. 4 documented cases of bioluminescent blood donations in the last 50 years, all anonymous, all lost from storage. And your holding company, she turned a page. My flatmate's boyfriend works in corporate compliance. I gave him the website URL, and he ran the registrar chain in 20 minutes. Your holding company has a documented history of purchasing estates from families with ties to local supernatural legends. She looked up at him. None of it is proof, but all of it is consistent with your claim. She closed the notebook. Her hands were trembling. I am terrified of you, she said. The admission was raw, unvarnished, and it cost her something to say it. I need you to understand that. I have been terrified for 9 days. I checked my locks 14 times the first night. I slept with Diogenes on the bed and a kitchen knife on the nightstand. The words hit him with a force no physical blow could have matched. And I am still here, she continued, because 2 things are also true. 1, if your blood really does what you described, then the cellular mechanism behind harmonic resonance has implications for regenerative medicine that I cannot walk away from without understanding. And 2, she faltered. Her gaze dropped to the tremor in his hands. You told me the truth when lying would have been easier and safer for you. You told me what you are, and then you stayed away when I told you to. 9 days. If you were what I was afraid you were, you wouldn't have waited. She pulled a laptop from her tote bag. So, I have a proposal. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it almost made him laugh, a sound he hadn't made in over a century. She was taking his desperate, monstrous reality and forcing it into the sane, logical framework of a scientific study. My terms are as follows, she said, and she was reading from a document on her screen, her voice steadying as she moved onto the familiar ground of protocol. 1. Full informed consent. You tell me everything. No more lies, no more omissions. Full disclosure. Agreed, he said. 2. Full data access. I will take regular samples from you, before, during, and after any treatment. All data shared. Agreed. 3. Controlled environment. Neutral location. Not your place, not mine. I set the schedule. I determine the dosage. Dosage, he repeated, the clinical term for feeding. Yes, dosage. We start small, 100 milliliters. We observe for 48 hours before proceeding. She looked up from her screen. There is one more condition, a personal one. Anything. My animals, Diogenes and the cats. They come with me to the neutral location. They're my responsibility, and you or anyone associated with you will not harm them, ever. The image of him, the ancient king, brought to heel by the needs of a 3-legged dog, was so profoundly ironic that the laugh finally escaped, a dry, cracked sound like stone splitting. It felt extraordinary. Haven, you have my word. Your animals will be safer than the crown jewels. Good, she said, the business-like tone returning. Send me your current blood work, the real stuff this time. We begin in 3 days. She packed her laptop, stood, and walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at him. Her face was pale and her eyes were afraid, and she was the bravest person he had ever met. Nikolai? Yes? If you're lying to me again, about any of it, I will find out. And I won't call the police. I'll publish. She held his gaze. Every medical database, every hematology journal, every news outlet. A paper on vampiric biology with a full case study. Peer-reviewed. He believed her absolutely. The neutral location was a decommissioned private clinic in Mayfair, sterile, white, anonymous. Haven's choice. She wanted a laboratory, not a lair. She arrived precisely on time with 2 dog crates, 3 cat carriers, and a bewildering array of animal supplies. Diogenes trotted in, sniffed a cabinet, and sat down with the air of a health inspector who had already found 3 violations. Haven was transformed. Scrubs, hair tied back, safety glasses on her head. She was no longer the exhausted woman from his sitting room. She was the principal investigator. The protocol, she said, handing him a tablet. Read it and sign. It was 12 pages. Meticulous. Brilliant. It listed potential risks to the donor, including unforeseen psychospiritual transference, and to the subject, including overdose toxicity. She had translated his monstrous condition into the language of risk management. He signed. For 2 hours, she drew his blood, centrifuged it, ran spectrometry. She took his temperature, a useless gesture as he had none, and recorded his symptoms on a pain scale. He submitted to her authority without question. He, who had not obeyed an order in 700 years, sat patiently while she worked. Then the moment arrived. She prepped her own arm with an alcohol wipe. The scent of her blood bloomed in the small room, and the hunger rose like a tide. His throat went dry. The world narrowed to the pulse in her wrist. Nikolai, her voice cutting through. You need to breathe. He obeyed, dragged air into his lungs. I am the investigator, she said, steady and firm. You are the subject. This is a clinical procedure, nothing more. She drew her own blood, 100 milliliters of golden red liquid that seemed to contain its own light. She labeled the bag with date, time, and volume. She brought it to him. It was warm, not with temperature, but with life itself. She snipped the tube. Ready? He couldn't speak. He nodded. He drank. It was not like feeding. It was like light flooding a dark room, like water pouring onto parched earth. The fog behind his eyes vanished, replaced by an impossible clarity. The grinding ache in his bones dissolved, sounds sharpened, colors deepened. He could feel individual threads in the recliner's fabric, hear the fluorescent lights humming in a multi-layered chord. It was a homecoming, his body remembering what it felt like to be whole. He looked at his hands. The tremor was gone, completely. It worked, he said, and his voice was full and clear. Haven was watching him, her face pale, her knuckles white on the back of a chair. Yeah, she said, her voice a little unsteady. I can see that. The clinical trial ran for 6 weeks. Twice a week, the Mayfair Clinic. The procedure never varied. Baseline readings, consent form, dosage, observation. Everything documented. The fading retreated like a vanquished army. With each treatment, more of his old self returned. The world, which had been gray and muffled for so long, was now a constant source of wonder. But the true transformation happened in the hours between the clinical procedures. The conversations that began as protocol and became something else entirely. It started during the 3rd session. She was running his post-treatment blood work, and the centrifuge needed 12 minutes. She was eating a granola bar. She always brought food, her metabolism running high from the donations. And she asked, without looking up from her laptop, so how does a 700-year-old vampire end up as a king? Is it hereditary? No, it is a burden one assumes because others are unwilling or unable. So a meritocracy based on longevity and political acumen, she summarized, typing. That is an efficient summary. It also took me 3 centuries to understand, so I'm impressed you arrived there in 4 seconds. She almost smiled. Almost. And the court, how many? 47 currently, spread across Austria, Hungary, and parts of the Czech Republic. Kale manages the day-to-day operations, which largely consist of ensuring that immortal beings with centuries of accumulated grievances do not murder each other over territorial disputes that originated before the printing press. That sounds like herding cats, she said, and then looked at the playpen where Epicurus was attempting to climb Aristotle. Actually, I take that back. Cats are easier. Significantly. She turned to face him fully. The clinical mask slipped, just for a second, and he saw the person underneath, the one who was curious, genuinely curious, about who he was beyond the biology. What were you before? Before you were a king and a vampire and all of this? A scholar, in Prague. I studied astronomy. I was 23. What happened? I was walking home from the university one evening. A man was being attacked in an alley. I intervened. He paused. The memory was 7 centuries old, but the sensory detail had never faded. The cobblestones slick with rain, the sound of the struggle, the smell of blood in the cold air. The attacker was a vampire. I did not know this. I was not successful in my intervention, but I was, apparently, interesting enough to keep. Haven set down her granola bar. You were turned because you tried to help a stranger. Yes. That's... She stopped. Something moved across her face, quick and complicated. That's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know, something more dramatic, a battlefield, a curse, a deal with something dark. The truth is usually less dramatic than the fiction, he said. The truth is that I was a 23-year-old with more compassion than common sense, who walked into an alley he should have walked past. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I would have walked into the alley too. He looked at her, this woman who rescued animals no one else would take, who had shown up at a vampire's door with a notebook and a proposal because she couldn't leave a mystery unsolved or a creature suffering. And he knew she was telling the truth. During the 4th week, Haven frowned at her laptop screen for a long time. She was running his post-treatment blood work, as always, and something had snagged her attention. Your white cell activity is unusual, she said, tapping through the spectral analysis. There's an energy signature in the plasma that doesn't match any known baseline, yours included. It wasn't there in weeks 1 or 2. Meaning? It looks almost like a residual charge, as if your cells aren't just consuming the resonance from my blood. They're storing it, building a reserve. She highlighted a peak on the graph. See this? That's not degradation. That's accumulation. Is that a concern? I don't know what it is yet. I'm flagging it. She made a note in her file, wrote, residual charge, unknown function, in the margin, and moved on. He filed it away too, though for different reasons. Something in him, the oldest and most instinctive part, already knew what it was. It felt like a warmth that didn't belong to him. Borrowed light. By the 4th week, the clinical mask was wearing thin on both sides. She brought pizza one night. Not the institutional granola bars or the protein shakes she usually consumed during sessions, but an actual pizza from a place around the corner that she said made the best margarita in Mayfair. I know you don't eat, she said, not looking at him. But it felt weird to keep eating cereal out of a box in front of you. I appreciate the thought. Though I should tell you that the last time I ate human food was in 1847, and it was a grave error in judgment involving a Christmas pudding. What happened? I would prefer not to discuss it. Suffice to say that the vampire digestive system is not designed for suet. She laughed, a real laugh, sudden, surprised, genuine. It filled the sterile room like a window being thrown open. He found himself cataloging the sound, storing it in the same part of his memory where he kept things he never wanted to lose. She ate her pizza. He sat with her. The familiar, savory smell was a pleasant background note. It was the most normal, human thing he had done in 500 years. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said, halfway through her second slice. "You have been drawing my blood and documenting my cellular regeneration for 4 weeks. I think we are past professional boundaries. Why didn't you take me? That first night. You were outside my window. You could have." He considered the question. He could give her the noble answer, that he was not a monster, that he had principles. But she had asked for no more lies. "I almost did," he said. The hunger was extreme. The fading was accelerating. Every logical calculation pointed to taking what I needed and leaving. "What stopped you?" "You were feeding a kitten, the smallest one. You held it in one hand and the bottle in the other, and you talked to it. I couldn't hear what you said, but the tenderness in the gesture was—" He stopped. The word he wanted was one he hadn't used in a very long time. It was human, in the best possible sense of that word. And I realized that I could not take from a person who gave so freely to the smallest things. She set down her pizza. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, with the guard fully down for the first time since he had known her. "I was in the foster system," she said, "from when I was 4. 11 placements in 14 years. Most of them were fine, some of them weren't." She picked at the edge of her pizza box. "The animals were the only things that were consistent. They didn't leave. They didn't decide they couldn't handle you anymore. They just needed you, and that was enough." She looked at him. "That's why I foster the ones nobody wants. The old ones, the sick ones, the 3-legged ones, because somebody should want them." The silence between them was full, not empty, full. He understood something about her then that he hadn't before. They were both creatures who had been remade by their wounds, who had found their purpose in caring for others because caring for others was the only reliable antidote to the loneliness of being fundamentally different from everyone around you. "Haven," he said quietly, "I think you are the most remarkable person I have encountered in 7 centuries. And I have encountered a great many people." "That's a statistically significant sample size," she said. And her voice cracked on the last word, and neither of them acknowledged it. The change happened gradually, and then all at once. It was the small things, the way she stopped flinching when his cold hand accidentally brushed hers during a blood draw. The way she began leaving books open on the counter for him, articles on chronobiology, papers on circadian rhythm disruption in long-lived organisms, a highlighted passage on the metabolic implications of extreme longevity with a sticky note that read, "Sound familiar?" He brought her things in return. An ancient leather-bound text on equine medicine from his library in Vienna, a first-edition copy of a philosophy book she'd mentioned. He would leave them on the table, small, silent offerings. She never commented on them directly, but they always appeared on her shelf the next session, spines cracked, pages marked. He found himself thinking about her during the days when the sun kept him inside. Not about her blood, about her. The way she argued with Diogenes about going outside in the rain. The particular expression she made when a piece of data surprised her, one eyebrow up, head tilted, as if she were listening to the information rather than reading it. The fact that she named all her animals after philosophers and spoke to them as if they understood the reference. On the last scheduled session, the fading was gone. According to her charts, his cellular regeneration was stable. The trial was, by all measures, a success. "So," she said, packing up her equipment with an efficiency that was slightly too practiced, slightly too fast. "That's it. The protocol is complete." A cold dread washed over him. Their arrangement was over. She would go back to vet school and foster kittens, and he would return to Vienna. "Haven," he said. She stopped, her back to him. "Thank you." You saved my life. I collected data, she said, her voice tight. The results were favorable. He stepped closer. He could hear her heart, the familiar rhythm that had become the baseline of his existence. It was no longer the sound of sustenance. It was the sound of Haven. It was more than that, he said softly, and you know it. She turned to face him. Her guard was down. In her eyes, he saw not the scientist, but the woman who had sat with him in the quiet hours, trading stories. He saw the same loss he was feeling. What happens now, Nikolai? She asked. I would be honored if you would consider continuing our partnership in a less clinical capacity. A small smile. Are you asking me out on a date, my lord? I am, though I confess my knowledge of contemporary dating rituals is several decades out of date. I am told it no longer involves the exchange of livestock. She laughed, that real, genuine sound. No livestock, but I think we can work something out. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers were cold against her warm skin. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch. The next 3 months were a negotiation more complex than any treaty Nikolai had brokered in 7 centuries. Haven would not leave London until her semester ended. She would not leave the kittens until they were old enough to travel. She would not leave at all until she had visited Vienna twice, inspected the palace for animal safety hazards, and presented Nikolai with a 6-page document titled Conditions of Cohabitation that included a clause about litter box placement and another about her right to an independent laboratory. He signed every page. Cale read the document and said, "She is more frightening than you are, my lord." Nikolai agreed. It was one of the things he loved most about her. The transition from London to the Hofburg Palace in Vienna was, for Haven, less of a culture shock and more of a logistical challenge. She arrived with a rented station wagon filled with dog crates, cat carriers, a rabbit hutch, and enough animal supplies to sustain a small veterinary hospital. The ancient vampires of the Eastern Court watched in stunned silence as Diogenes trotted into the grand hall and immediately began sniffing a priceless 16th century tapestry. Haven was directing placement of her menagerie. The kitten's playpen goes by the window. They need morning sun. Diogenes, leave the furniture alone. Plato, stop trying to climb the curtains. Cale approached Nikolai, his expression a study in controlled horror. My lord, what is all this? This is our new research and development wing, Nikolai said. The fluffy white one is using a Ming vase as a scratching post. It's a reproduction, Nikolai said. It was not a reproduction. He did not care. Haven integrated into the court with the same methodical pragmatism she applied to everything. She treated the ancient vampires not as fearsome creatures, but as biological anomalies to be studied and, where possible, treated. She discovered that Cale suffered from a chronic inflammation she could manage with an herbal supplement, earning his eternal, grudging respect. Ilara, a warrior of 4 centuries, discovered a talent for calming frightened animals. Lucian found himself arranging bulk deliveries of kitten formula. It was Cale who brought the first complication, 3 weeks after Haven moved in. He appeared at Nikolai's study door with the particular expression he wore when delivering news he knew his king would not want to hear. 2 formal requests, Cale said. Ilara and Sergei. They want access to Haven's blood. Preventative treatment, they're calling it. Nikolai's stillness changed quality, from calm to dangerous. No. She is one person, my lord. You have 47 subjects. If the fading spreads... I said no. Her blood is not a resource to be requisitioned. She is not a supply line. The court will ask again. Others are already whispering. Then let them whisper. Haven's autonomy is not negotiable. Not for me, not for anyone. Haven, who had been passing in the corridor with a stack of veterinary journals, stopped. She had heard enough. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. You're talking about me like I'm not standing here, she said. Cale looked at Nikolai. Nikolai looked at Haven. How much did you hear? Nikolai asked. Enough to know you need a better solution than just saying no. She set the journals on his desk. If my blood has a specific resonance signature that triggers cellular regeneration, then that signature has a molecular basis, which means, in theory, it can be isolated, synthesized, replicated. She looked between them. Give me a laboratory and 6 months. If the mechanism is what I think it is, we won't need my veins. We'll need a centrifuge and a good spectral sequencer. Cale stared at her, then at Nikolai, then back at her. She is, in fact, more frightening than you are, my lord. I told you, Nikolai said. Nikolai's life, once measured in silent decades, was now measured by feeding schedules and the antics of Epicurus, who had developed a vendetta against any unattended pen. He had never been happier. His love for Haven was a quiet, steady thing. It lived in the small moments. The way he would find a book left open for him, the way she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder while reading. The touch of her warm hand on his cold one, a constant grounding reminder of the life she had given back to him. He learned the rhythms of her mortal life: sleep, food, warmth. He, who had not needed a kitchen in 700 years, now found it the heart of his home, filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of her humming. One night, months after she had moved in, he found her in the library, her face pale with worry. She was holding the smallest kitten, a premature runt she had named Hypatia. The tiny creature was struggling to breathe. She's not taking the bottle, Haven whispered, her voice thick. Her temperature is dropping. I don't think she's going to make it. Nikolai knelt beside her. He looked at the tiny life, no bigger than the palm of his hand. He saw the fierce, desperate love in Haven's eyes, the same love she had shown him when he was the one who was fading. He took the kitten from her gently. It was so light, its bones as delicate as a bird's. It was cold, its life force flickering. He remembered that feeling. He remembered the cold. He held Hypatia against his chest, cupping her in his hands. He did not have body heat, but he had something else, a life force that had been rekindled, a vitality that burned brighter than ever. He closed his eyes and focused, pushing a tiny, infinitesimal thread of that energy into the small body. The residual charge Haven had flagged in his blood work, the borrowed light his cells had been storing. He could feel it now, a warm current running beneath the surface of his skin. He let some of it go. He sat for an hour, silent, still, the ancient king pouring his immense will into saving one tiny creature. Haven watched, her hand resting on his arm. Slowly, the kitten's breathing deepened. A tremor ran through its body. It stirred. Haven let out a sob. She prepared a fresh bottle. This time Hypatia latched on, weakly at first, then with growing strength. They stayed there for the rest of the night, taking turns feeding the kitten, their shoulders touching in the lamplit quiet. The residual charge, Haven said after a long silence. Her voice was exhausted but alert. That's what you just did, isn't it? You gave her some of what I gave you. He looked at her. She had seen it. Of course she had. She always saw it. Yes, he said. She nodded, already filing the observation, already thinking about what it meant. We'll need to measure your levels tomorrow. I want to know how much you lost and whether it regenerates. Even now, even here, with tears on her face and a kitten in her arms, the scientist never slept. The sky outside the library windows was softening from black to deep blue. Dawn was an hour away, the quiet hour, the one that belonged to neither night nor day. Hypatia was asleep in her nest of blankets, warm and breathing steadily. She was going to live. In Haven's lap, Plato was also asleep, his oversized ears twitching in some dream of philosophical pursuit. Diogenes was curled at their feet, his single front paw tucked neatly beneath him. Haven was awake. She had been watching Nikolai feed the last of the kittens. Epicurus, who had screamed for 20 minutes before condescending to accept the bottle, and there was an expression on her face he couldn't read. "You're staring," he said, carefully setting the empty bottle down and cradling the sleeping kitten against his chest. I'm observing, she corrected. There's a difference. Staring implies a lack of purpose. And what is the purpose of your observation? She was quiet for a moment. Then, I ran the numbers on your cellular degradation rate, the pre-treatment data. He waited. Without my blood, the fading would have killed you within a year, maybe less. The rate of telomere erosion alone. She stopped, her jaw tightened. You were actually dying. I knew it intellectually. But I reran the numbers last week and her voice cracked very slightly. I didn't realize how close it was. It was close, he said quietly. And now it's not. Your cellular markers are stable. Better than stable, they're regenerative. But, she pulled up a chart on her tablet. The decay signature is still there. Dormant, not gone. Based on the degradation curve, I'd estimate you'll need a maintenance dose every 3 to 4 months. Indefinitely. The word settled between them. Indefinitely, meaning as long as she was alive to give it. You're going to live, she said, as long as I do. Yes, she nodded. She had known the answer. She had worked it out weeks ago, probably, run the numbers, plotted the curve, arrived at the conclusion with the same clinical precision she brought to everything. The conclusion that their fates were now bound together in a way neither of them had anticipated. That if she aged and died while he remained exactly as he was, the fading would return. That he would follow her into the dark, not decades later, but months. Haven, don't, she said softly. Don't tell me it doesn't matter. Don't tell me we'll find a way. I'm a scientist. I need you to not lie to me about this. I won't, he said. I have never lied to you. Not since the night I told you what I am. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. She looked young. She looked mortal. So what are the options for someone in my situation? He understood what she was asking, the word she was circling without saying it. He owed her the truth, as he always had. There is one, he said. The change. What was done to me can be done to others. It is not a gentle process. It is painful and disorienting, and it takes time to learn what you have become. There are things you would lose: food, sunlight, the ordinary rhythms of a human life. There are things you would gain. Immortality. Time, he corrected. Not immortality, time. The fading proves that even we are not truly immortal. But time. A great deal of it. She was quiet for so long that the first pale edge of dawn began to creep across the floor toward his feet. He shifted his chair back from the window, a reflexive movement so habitual he barely registered it. Would you want that? She asked. For me to be changed? He had thought about this. He had thought about it every night since the first time she fell asleep on his shoulder, and he had counted the beats of her heart and known that each one was borrowed. What I want, he said carefully, is for you to have the choice. I will not make it for you. I will not ask it of you. I watched you set the terms for our clinical trial, and I watched you transform my court, and I watched you save Hypatia tonight with nothing but stubbornness and love. And in every case, you made the decision. You chose. That is who you are. I would not take that from you for anything. But if I asked you, if I chose it, then I would be there, he said. Through every part of it, I would not leave your side. She reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, his were cold. The familiar contrast, life pressing against the absence of it. She laced her fingers through his and held on. Not yet, she said. I'm not ready yet. I have things to finish. The degree. Hypatia needs me in this form for a while longer, and I want... She faltered, and when she spoke again her voice was smaller than he had ever heard it. I want to live this part first. The human part. I want to know what I'm choosing to leave. Then we live this part, he said, for as long as you need. She leaned into him, her head finding its place on his shoulder, the exact spot where it fit. The spot that had been empty for 700 years, and now felt like the only part of him that was truly warm. Nikolai? Yes. When I'm ready. When I choose it. I want you to know. She turned her face into his shoulder, and he felt the dampness of tears against the cold fabric of his shirt. I'm choosing you. Not immortality. Not time. You. That's the variable that changed the equation. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. Her hair smelled of soap and coffee and the faint, wild sweetness of her blood, that impossible golden scent that had drawn him across a continent to find her. And you, he said, his voice low and rough with 700 years of loneliness finally breaking against the shore of something that could hold it, are the only empirical evidence I have ever encountered for the existence of grace. She laughed, wet and quiet. That's not a peer-reviewed claim. No, he agreed, holding her closer, the sleeping kitten still cradled against his chest, the ancient palace settling around them in the pre-dawn silence. But the data is compelling. Outside, the sky continued its slow, patient turn toward morning. The light would come, as it always did, and he would retreat from it, as he always had. But in this room, in this hour, there was a warmth that no sunrise could match, the steady beat of her heart against his side, the trust of small creatures sleeping in their laps, and the quiet, revolutionary knowledge that he was no longer alone, that he would not have to be for a very long time, that the woman who had saved him with a clipboard and a list of demands had, in the end, given him something far more extraordinary than her blood. She had given him a reason to want the time.